These days, a ton of filmmakers and other creatives are facing the same dilemma. You see how valuable a YouTube audience could be for your business, but you don't want to give up the meaningful work you actually love doing just to chase views or review gimbals in your basement. That's exactly how I felt a few years ago. I was watching the first wave of filmmaking channels explode, but I couldn't see a way to do YouTube myself without sacrificing my career or feeling like I was pretending to be someone I'm not. Then COVID hit, and overnight, every shoot I had lined up disappeared, and for the first time, I realized how little control I actually had over my career. So to keep myself sane, I started filming YouTube videos in my living room with no plan other than to try and make one video a week for a year. 3.5 years later, YouTube has changed everything about my business. It's given me creative freedom and access to gear and helped me build an incredible community around the world. And because I just moved into a brand new studio space, I thought I'd take the opportunity to break down how I balance running a YouTube channel with my professional work, how I slowly built up my studio over the years, and if you're interested, how you can do the same, all without burning out or turning into some cringy influencer. Okay, so at this point, I think we can put the argument that YouTube is just a place for memes and cat videos to rest because the data is pretty clear. YouTube is the world's biggest streaming platform, and it's not even close. There are hundreds of thousands of creators who get more views than CNN on their content regularly, so I'm not gonna waste any time arguing about whether or not YouTube is a real platform for serious people because that debate is over. Yes, there is a lot of low quality content out there, and no one has quite figured out the economics of producing premium quality TV shows only for YouTube, but I think we can all accept that YouTube is one of the most important cultural forces in the media landscape these days. And you don't have to look very hard to find all sorts of people dishing out generic advice while not so subtly trying to sell you a pack of Lightroom presets or something that turn all the skin tones orange. And it starts to feel like the only option on YouTube is to play that game. But YouTube doesn't have to be that at all, and there are tons of examples out there of filmmakers building a brand without selling out. And yeah, I used to feel like the only thing that anyone would watch were drone reviews by people who clearly didn't use any of this stuff in real life, but that's just not really true anymore. Actually, from what I've seen, the era of the hardcore gear shill is sort of winding down because there's just so much of it that it's kind of hard to stand out from all the established voices. What people do want, though, is genuinely helpful content that will help them in their own lives. That could be about gear because gear is an important part of the filmmaking process, but it's also much more than that. And if you can tap into that and share genuine experiences and lessons that people can learn from, whether you're just starting out or you've been shooting for 20 years, people will be interested eventually. You might not go mega viral or become the next Peter McKinnon, but that shouldn't be the main goal anyways. The point is that if you help people, they'll watch. And if you repeat that cycle for long enough, you'll eventually be sitting on a personal branding tool that has the potential to reshape your entire business. But before we get sucked into how to get started yourself, like I mentioned, I just moved into a brand new studio, and since it's the first time I've been able to properly combine my YouTube setup with my production company gear all in one place, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to show you behind the scenes. Actually, out of curiosity, how many of you even noticed that I moved locations for the last few videos? By completely random chance, this space also has a whitewashed brick wall behind it on the same side of the frame, so it actually looks incredibly similar to the old setup. Let me know in the comments if you noticed. Because even though I've finally gone full YouTuber and picked up a rolling tool chest, I definitely didn't start out with a space like this. Oh, and FYI, if you're working out of an East Toronto basement like I am, pro tip, do not buy one of these things. It almost killed us getting it down here. Looking back, my first studio was pretty rough, just like the quality of the videos I made there. But as cringy as I find those now, the space worked for me and what I had at the time. I hadn't really worked much in a year and a half because of travel restrictions, and I was living in Vancouver at the time, which is crazy expensive, and I could only afford a place with a tiny second bedroom. Don't get me wrong, I know that even that's a big privilege, but don't forget that my main job is filming documentaries, usually internationally, so I'm already sitting on a small mountain of gear that needs to be stored as well. That meant the YouTube set had to be fit around the work gear, which meant I couldn't leave anything set up permanently and had to build the set and then take everything down each time I made a video. It was a slog, and honestly the videos sucked, and it was just all around kind of an embarrassing time. But I made it work for quite a while anyways, and I think I did it for more than 6 months in there. I was editing everything myself and I was going crazy trying to make thumbnails, but I kept it going. Then little by little, the world opened back up and I went back to work. My first gig was a 70-day remote access travel shoot on the coast of Labrador, and pretty much the second I left my apartment, the early version of this channel died. There was just no way I was going to keep up with the demands of shooting in that kind of environment and spending 5 to 10 hours a week on my laptop editing, so I hit the pause button for a few months. But the whole time I was gone, I couldn't stop thinking about ideas for new videos and how I was going to make them even better. I also kept coming back to the idea that YouTube had the potential to be an incredible branding tool, and I felt like I was letting an opportunity slip away by quitting. COVID had shown me that my career was actually a lot more precarious than I used to think, and I didn't want to look back one day and realize that I should have acted while I had the chance. Anyways, even though I'd stopped posting, the videos I'd already uploaded started to get a few positive comments, which was motivating enough that I decided to start treating the channel like a business investment when I got back, and actually reinvest some of my income into making it more sustainable long term. So just like I'd invest in cameras and lenses to make my job easier, I decided to invest in the channel, and that meant looking for an editor. Now I couldn't just hire any editor, and when I started looking, I wasn't at all sure I'd find the right person. I didn't have very much money at all at the time, so I started looking on Upwork, who are not the sponsors of this video, though that would have been an incredible integration opportunity, so Upwork, let's make deals if you're watching.
Right?
Seriously though, I was not in a good spot financially at the time, and I really needed to keep it cheap while I funneled every available dollar I had into a feature documentary passion project. That meant I had a max spend of $100 per YouTube video, which was obviously very little relative to a pro editor's day rate. But I got lucky, and pretty much right away I found Santi, who you might have heard me mention before on the channel. He was a film nerd like me, and he saw the vision and was interested in building up a channel together. So he agreed to work fast and super cheap with the promise of more equity as the channel grew, and almost 4 years later, we're still working together. Having him edit the videos made an immediate difference to my workflow, and literally overnight, I got back hours and hours of editing time that I could now spend brainstorming or writing or filming or traveling for a job. Then a few things went sideways in my life, and I had to leave that apartment in a hurry and move into a temporary spot that was way smaller and didn't have a second bedroom, so my set became my living room. But even though this was kind of a weird limbo time for me while I tried to figure out my next moves in life, so it was also the time when I saw the channel have the first signs of real growth. Up to that point, most of the videos I posted would get like a few dozen views, and anything above a few hundred would be considered a pretty big result for me. It was hardly life-changing traffic at the time, but I was learning how to build a production system around YouTube that could keep itself going even when I was busy in my professional life. Santi and I hit a really solid rhythm after a few months where I could just dump raw footage into Dropbox and he'd be able to take it from there, which then unlocked the real secret to balancing YouTube and work: batching. Since I didn't have to edit anymore, I was then able to write multiple scripts over like a week or something and then record them all in a single day, which he could then pull down one by one and cut even if I was out of town on a shoot. And once we had that system going, I was able to lock into a consistent publishing schedule and start uploading once a week, no matter where I was. So when I eventually did go away to shoot that feature doc, I spent a month beforehand batching 16 full-length videos complete with thumbnails and titles. Then I disappeared into the forest for 4 months. I was sleeping in a tent and I was barely able to keep up with how the videos were doing, but because of our system, they kept going live every Monday. Then out of nowhere, one of them seemed to resonate with viewers for some reason, and the algorithm picked it up, and I went from a few hundred subscribers to a few thousand pretty much the next day. It was really cool to see, and it sort of validated all that work I'd done already, and even though I was still out in the middle of nowhere, I was even more committed to keep it going. So eventually I wrapped that shoot and packed up the tent and then closed down my apartment and moved back to Toronto, and the whole time I just kept working with that same system. When I had to travel, I'd batch enough videos to cover the time I was away, and when I got back home and had time between jobs, I'd write and record new videos. That's also when I was lucky enough to find an apartment in my budget that had a separate office room that I could turn into a studio, and I then finally had a spot where I could leave the YouTube gear permanently set up, which saved tons of time, which you'll know if you're shooting a lot of stuff. It was an absolutely tiny room, just 8 by 8 feet, and I completely packed it with stuff. In the videos, it doesn't really look that small because of the wide angle lens, but trust me, it was a nightmare of a space to work out of. Still, being able to have a dedicated recording spot streamlined things even more and made keeping up with my production schedule even easier still. The channel kept growing, and every once in a while something would perform especially well and we'd get a boost, and sometime during that first year we passed 50,000 subscribers. And remember, all of this was just me sitting in a corner with $150 worth of lighting gear talking about experiences and lessons I'd had on jobs, so it wasn't like I was creating the next Beast games or anything in there. I mean, it was so cramped that I actually had to rent a separate storage locker 20 minutes away just to keep my bigger grip and lighting equipment, which was a total waste of money, but I had no other option. But honestly, I don't think the tiny space hurt the videos at all because no one really complained, ever to my knowledge. So the point here is that you don't need some giant Midwestern garage filled with LED light strips to get started with this stuff. And you don't need as much gear as you might think either, because I'm still using the same lighting setup today. I personally just use two things, a $150 Godox LED panel and then this aperture light bulb that I hang from a $2 socket cord I bought at a dollar store. I shoot on the FX3 because that's what I own for work, but you could go with something way cheaper than that and still get pretty much the same results with this same lighting setup. So it's not the gear that's stopping you, because if you have something to say, you really don't need that much. So that room is where the channel really grew into its modern form. Over the next year and a bit, we doubled in size and I got gradually better at making these videos interesting. At least I think I did anyways, but you tell me. Because side note here, when I started, I thought I'd be automatically good at YouTube because I worked in TV, but I was dead wrong on that. They are very different art forms, and structuring a great YouTube video is not at all the same as filming a scene for a TV show. So if you decide to start making videos your own, just be ready for that, because they are their own unique thing and it takes a while to get the hang of it. Or at least it took me a while anyways. You may be way more of a natural. But the important thing to remember is that during this whole time, I kept working and traveling, and my filmmaking career was always the top priority. And it will be for the foreseeable future. I'm not actually sure what I'd even make YouTube videos about if I wasn't working, because that's really where I get all the ideas from and the only way I'm actually able to test gear in the real world, so one is sort of dependent on the other, at least for me right now. Anyways, this was also the time when the audience was getting big enough that the money coming in from different places combined to a total that actually made a meaningful difference in my life. Now, just to be clear, I just filed my corporate taxes for the year, and I can confidently say that I earned enough working in the traditional industry to have supported myself just fine. I didn't start a YouTube channel because I couldn't survive out there, so don't listen to anyone who says that it's impossible to make a living doing creative stuff. It's not about needing the channel to prop up my art or anything like that, but what it's done is given me a side income that allows me to be so much more selective about the jobs I take. Because yeah, I could have been just fine with my industry income last year, but at the same time, I'm a 40-year-old freelancer in an expensive world, and if I want any shot at retirement, I need to save like crazy while I can. We all do. Basically what I'm saying is that I want to be making more than I need at this stage in life so I can squirrel it away for when my back eventually gives out and I can't shoot anymore. So if I wasn't spending so much time making these videos and writing newsletters and all the other stuff to generate this side income, I'd have been out there drumming up more work, which a lot of the time anyways ends up being the kind of stuff I'd rather not be shooting. But because of the little bits and bobs of YouTube income that trickle in from different places, I don't have to do those gigs anymore, and I can still save at a rate that makes me feel safe. To me, that's the ultimate in creative freedom. A few high quality shoots a year that I really give all my energy to, and then some downtime in between where I reset and focus on the channel for a while. To me, that balance has been just about perfect, because not only am I happier with the kind of jobs I'm doing, but I'm also less stressed between gigs because the side income means I'm not freaking out when I don't have the next job on the books. And let's be clear here, I'm not like raking in millions here, because I only really have a few things I feel good about selling to my audience, and they're pretty niche, high-ticket products like my documentary cinematography course. AdSense is fine and it's nice, but it's so variable, and unless something goes unexpectedly viral, it's not that much money usually. Sponsorships fill in some of the gaps, but most of the time I only do one sponsored video every month or so, and that usually goes toward paying Santi's monthly salary. And don't worry, he's making a lot more than $100 a video now, so don't feel too bad for him. I guess my point is, again, that the two things support each other. I might not be getting rich from YouTube like some creators, but that's okay because it's not my full-time job. At the same time, it's made my actual job a lot less stressful by saving me from having to shoot low-end home renos that I don't want to be on. So it's a great balance that feels sustainable for me and what I like. And I personally think the same thing would work just as well for a lot of other filmmakers and photographers or creatives of any kind really, if they just stick with it long enough to see results. And of course, assuming they've put in the time so that they actually have something to say, because if your goal is just to get famous on YouTube, I'd say it would be a lot easier if you picked another niche than filmmaking. So that all brings us to now, because just a few weeks ago, I moved into a new place, and for the first time, it had a space big enough for me to have all my production gear and my YouTube studio in one place. Anyways, if you just came for the studio tour and you didn't care about any of that other stuff I said in the first part of the video, I'm sorry, and let's get started with the biggest YouTuber cliche of all, the rolling tool chest. Sadly, I didn't go for the iconic Husky one that everyone else has, mainly because I went with a much cheaper Canadian knockoff version that was on sale at the time. But I can't stress enough how brutal this was to get down the stairs and how borderline unsafe it was doing it with even 3 pretty big people. If you're working in a basement like I am, I'd suggest not ordering one of these things. Now that it's down here though, I have no idea how I'll ever get it back out. And speaking of this space, even though I've been talking about it like it's some crazy upgrade, it's really just a 20 by 15 foot semi-finished basement with very low ceilings. Like I'm talking sub 7 feet for my North American friends and under 2 meters for the metrics. I'm 6 foot and it works with me without feeling claustrophobic, and Hank, who's a bit taller, can still move around in here, but anyone much taller than that would probably hate it down here. Anyways, it's not a luxury space by any means, but for me, it's a dream. Like when the real estate agent brought us to look at this house, I didn't actually care about the bedrooms or anything. I just wanted to hang down here and plan how I could set all this stuff up. So that should tell you a lot about my priorities. So then coming back around to the YouTube corner, but from the opposite side of the desk, if I move the actual desk out of the way, everything's sort of on wheels, so I can hopefully move it around and get a few different looks out of this space. But the thing that's really clearing up the floor clutter is this sort of one stand system that I finally built. I've been researching these kind of rigs for years. I've watched all the DSLR video shooter tutorials and I've seen all the breakdowns, or at least I thought I had. And the hang up on these kinds of rigs was always the weight capacity of the arms you could mount. Like the DSLR video shooter version I found had a weight capacity of 6 pounds, but because I like to shoot off of a teleprompter with fairly detailed notes, the whole weight was way too much and I could never find a way to mount the things I wanted to. Like I knew I wanted to use a big light as well, so I didn't want to have, you know, a 4-pound weight restriction on that thing. But now I found these ones, or Hank found these ones on B&H from I think Impact, and they hold a lot more, or at least more than enough, and it's really allowed me to actually build one of these rigs, and it is very, very nice. So the whole thing's built around this one rolling stand. It's super solid. Technically you need sandbags, but even with all this stuff on it, it's completely stable. Like it's not going anywhere. So the camera at the heart, it's an FX3, like I said, with this teleprompter. I find it really hard to sit down in front of a camera and just ad lib if I want the videos to be coherent. So this is extremely helpful, and that runs off of an iPad. And then I have this mic arm that I use to boom a Sennheiser 416 out over me while I'm sitting down. And then the key light is this ultra cheap Godox FL 120 something. I got this light way back when I first started the channel. It was like, I think one of the very first gear companies that reached out, which I thought was really cool at the time, and they sent me this panel. And the reason I asked for it is because it's such an unusual shape. It's 1 foot by 4 feet, which is kind of pretty uncommon in the lighting world. You get a lot of 1x1s, 2x2s, 4x4s, but this shape I thought could be really useful for getting lights up into corners. And so I was excited to have it as a cinematographer. But then actually what I realized is that for YouTube, in the tiny spaces I've been in, this is the perfect tool because you can get this little light up in high places angled down, doesn't create a huge floor footprint, and at the same time you can wrap light around a large area. So it's ended up being extremely helpful. And it might actually be that out of all the fancy lights I have, this has been the one that's been used the most out of all of them. So that's kind of funny. Great thing for spaces like this, and highly recommended. It's been a real workhorse. I've got a little Atomos Shinobi monitor on here that I use to make sure the framing is good. And other than that, I've got all the power cables mounted to the frame itself, so everything's charged. I don't have to change batteries on this. Yeah, the cables are organized enough that they're not going to get on the floor, no one's going to trip on them, and I can move this thing around, because the end vision is that I'd like to have a couple different backgrounds to play with in this space. You know, maybe you can talk about technical stuff over there in the gear corner, and you can talk about more serious or personal stuff on the couch. I don't know. But I like the idea of being able to change everything around and move it and do things that I never could do in my old studio, which was that 8x8 room. So that is the whole creative space. Let me just pull the desk back and sit back down in front of the light, and we'll wrap this tour up. Anyways, let's not get too sidetracked into a full studio tour video, though if you did want to see a look at this hybrid filmmaking / YouTube basement, let me know. Because my point is that even though I'm beyond happy to have this space, I was perfectly capable of running this channel with much less, and I don't want anyone to think that they need anything more than just an empty corner to shoot into to get started. Look, I get that most people probably got into film to be behind the camera and not in front of it. I mean, I did too. But I hope that by sharing a bit of how I got into YouTube and then slowly built things up over the years, it might give you some ideas for how to leverage this platform in your own way. And no, I'm not saying everyone should be on YouTube, but if you're curious and you think you might enjoy the process, there's just so much upside. And you don't have to do things like I did either, because there are so many different models of how YouTube can help filmmakers, including as just a place to show your best professional work to the world. So whether you want to review gear or upload short films or document your behind the scenes process, I just hope you'll think about how you can make this stuff work for you. But I also get that just hearing me talk about YouTube gets old, so I actually recorded another video I'll post in a few weeks where I talk to 3 other full-time filmmakers who run side hustle channels, so you can hear it from them too. See ya.